There's a lot of videos out there that talk about bipolar mania, which makes sense considering a bipolar diagnosis is based on the way we experience mania. But what about the proverbial crash that often follows a manic episode? Those of us, like myself, who live with bipolar know it's so much more than just feeling down or depressed. Today on Polar Warriors, I'd like to explore the science behind why the crash happens, what it feels like, and provide some tips on how to reduce the time we spend crashing. Up to 80% of people with bipolar will experience a depressive crash after a manic or hypomanic episode. It's like the classic cause and effect of what goes up must come down. The crash is usually proportionate to how high we went, but not all the time. To understand the crash, it's important to know what's happening in our brain during the manic phase preceding the crash. During mania, our brains are flooded with feel-good chemicals like neurotransmitters and endorphins. They act as natural painkillers, and we get a boost of energy. Our brain's reward pathways are bathed in biochemicals that elevate us, making it nearly impossible to sleep. I've had many people assume I was high on drugs when in reality, I was high on my illness. Also, most of us are mania chasers, meaning we engage in activities, substance use, or eat foods that keep the manic party going. It's subconsciously a way of self-medicating to avoid the impending crash. At the core of all of this is a very important neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is responsible for motivation, reward, and pleasure. It plays a major role in bipolar disorder, especially in the extreme mood swings that define the condition. Dopamine spikes during mania can give us incredible energy. Our thoughts begin to race. We might feel more creative. We make impulsive choices, and our sexual desire is insatiable. The brain becomes overly sensitive to rewards, making activities like shopping, gambling, or risky sex feel irresistible. Decision-making is impaired because the prefrontal cortex, which regulates impulse control, is overwhelmed by excessive dopamine. This heightened state isn't sustainable, and eventually the brain has to compensate. Enter the bipolar crash. After a manic or hypomanic episode, our dopamine levels plummet. This causes us to lose our motivation, or what I call my spark. Activities that once felt exciting now feel meaningless. A sudden drop in dopamine can feel like emotional withdrawal, similar to coming down from a drug high. After mania has overstimulated us to the max, we struggle to function normally because we start to enter a dopamine deficit state. I'll explain more in a minute. Extreme fatigue from the crash makes simple tasks like showering, eating, or getting out of bed feel overwhelming and literally physically painful. So why do we have to crash? I mean, why can't we feel euphoric pleasure all the time, or just come down to baseline instead of crashing? There's actually some fascinating science behind this, so let's get into it. You might not know this, but pain and pleasure are co-located, meaning they are processed in the same areas of the brain, primarily the reward system. They are deeply interconnected where one affects the other. Our brain is constantly trying to maintain a balance between pain and pleasure, also known as homeostasis. Picture a balance scale or a seesaw where one side represents pleasure and the other side represents pain. When we engage in a pleasurable activity like eating sugar, scrolling social media, gaming, or especially being manic, the pleasure side of the scale tilts downward as dopamine floods the brain. However, the brain doesn't want to stay in a heightened state forever. It's simply not sustainable, so it releases chemicals that counteract dopamine and other feel-good neurotransmitters. These chemicals want to bring us back to baseline by jumping on the pain side of the scale. Here's the problem. The more we lean towards the pleasure side of the scale, the more our brain tries to counter this by releasing more and more anti-pleasure chemicals. If we keep pushing to stay manic, the pain side of the scale gets so heavy that the pleasure side can't keep up. Similar to a rubber band snapping, we fall into a dopamine deficit state, where the anti-pleasure chemicals exceed the feel-good ones. Our scale rarely ever returns to the middle after being manic or abusing substances. Most often it tilts to an equally and opposing side of pain, resulting in what we affectionately call the bipolar crash, comedown, or withdrawals. The longer we spend in mania, the heavier the pain side of the scale gets. If we spend weeks or months chasing the mania with thrills or substances, the crash can potentially last a lot longer. Even if we stop seeking pleasure altogether, it takes a while for the brain to stop flooding the pain side of the scale. When we experience pleasure, the brain compensates by increasing our sensitivity to pain. This is why overindulging in pleasure, like drug use, food, or binge watching, can make us feel worse over time. Special thanks to Stanford University's Dr. Anna Lembke for her amazing balance scale analogy. She wrote a book called Dopamine Nation that I found to be very enlightening. Other causes of the bipolar crash include manic exhaustion. I move, talk, and socialize a lot more when I'm manic, on limited sleep and little food. I often crash physically, which can turn into a mental crash. Physical pain and fatigue majorly impact my mental health. It's all very connected. Next is sleep. I always say how sleep is the air and water of bipolar wellness. Mania often leads to sleep deprivation, which can severely impact our moods. If I even sense I'm getting elevated, I have an emergency sleep medication protocol to protect my sleep at all costs. One of the fastest ways to a bipolar crash is not getting proper sleep. Another reason for crashing is the emotional fallout from everything I did while symptomatic. When I'm manic, I say and do a lot of stupid shit. Not so much now, but in the past, I went all out. Manic spending sprees, cheating on partners, losing good friends, upsetting my family, quitting jobs, substance abuse, etc., etc. All of this created tremendous guilt, regret, and stress that fueled a depressive crash. Moving on, this next one is medication changes or not taking the meds as prescribed. Stopping or changing mood stabilizers, antipsychotics, or antidepressants can destabilize brain chemistry, triggering a depressive crash. Same thing with ADHD, pain, and anxiety meds. If we built up a dependency to these and stop abruptly, we can go into severe withdrawals, resulting in a horrible crash. I think we've talked enough about why the crash happens. Now let's talk about what the crash feels like. It's such a subjective experience because we all have different types of bipolar, different triggers, different thresholds for pain, and very personal traumas, all of which can impact the way we experience and process through the crash. Speaking from my own lived experience, the crash feels like the world has lost all color and meaning. It's like my brain is literally shutting down after running at full speed, or like I'm trapped in a body that won't cooperate. It's like I'm grieving something, but I'm not sure what. Even if there's no logical reason for it, there's this heavy, sinking feeling that something bad is happening or will happen soon. It feels like emotional amnesia, where I can't remember ever feeling good, and it feels like these feelings are going to last forever. I get this strong desire to disappear, run away, or shut off from everything and everyone. After mania, I often question, who am I really? Am I the energetic, unstoppable version, or this numb, depressed one? It's confusing and disorienting. The crash can feel like all of my nerves are exposed, making everything feel more painful, Criticism, loud noises, social interactions, even everyday tasks like taking a shower are so painful I avoid them. Sometimes I feel like I'm completely alone or disconnected from others, even when surrounded by friends. A recurring thought I have is, what's the point? Because it feels like everything I cared about during mania, like projects, relationships, and passions, suddenly seem meaningless. Now, I could go on, but I think I've covered enough ground to explain what the bipolar crash feels like, at least to me. Next, I'd like to share a few strategies I have for reducing the time I spend crashing. It would make sense that if we are crashing from a dopamine deficit state, engaging in things that naturally stimulate dopamine production can help ease the pain and reduce the duration. Here's the hard part. If I let the depression go too far, I can become catatonic, where I shut down and can't do the things I need to feel better. If possible, I try to take action at the first signs of a crash and keep realistic expectations. One of the first things I do is protect what I put in my body. When I'm crashing, I either crave nothing but junk food or completely lose my appetite. What I eat or don't eat has a huge impact on how long I stay in the crash. I try to get some lean protein, healthy fats, lots of omega-3s, and a multivitamin in my body. Skipping meals or surviving on sugar and caffeine just amplify or prolong the crash. Now, I have a really hard time preparing food when I'm crashing. Something I do when I'm well is cook extra food, and I'll freeze a meal each time. After several days, I have enough healthy food to eat when I'm not well. Staying hydrated is just as important because dehydration can amplify fatigue and brain fog. Sometimes all I can do is drink a glass of water from bed, and that's okay. Tiny victories add up. The second thing I do is one of the hardest when I'm not well. This would be movement. I go on a lot of walks or do other basic exercises. Movement releases endorphins and helps rebalance my energy levels. Sometimes stretching from bed is all I can do, but I still try to incorporate movement no matter what. My next tip is to get a little light in your life. I always joke and tell people I'm solar powered because of how much light makes a difference. If you can, sit out in the sun, close your eyes and let the sunlight hit your face. You can also accomplish this by using light therapy lamps or light boxes. Just be mindful of them causing an elevated state. My fourth tip is to leverage pain. When we experience pain, the brain compensates by releasing dopamine, leading to a delayed sense of pleasure. This explains why exercise, cold exposure, or even deep massage create a rewarding effect afterwards. Using controlled discomfort to stimulate dopamine can sometimes help lift me out of the crash. Tip number 5 is to practice dopamine fasting or a dopamine detox to prevent overindulgence. They say too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Sometimes taking a break from high dopamine activities like scrolling social media, binge watching TV, or snacking can help reset the brain's reward system. By intentionally reducing instant gratification, we allow our natural dopamine levels to stabilize, making it easier to find motivation and joy in everyday tasks again. Moving on to tip number 6, protect your sleep at all costs. Like I mentioned earlier, sleep is the air and water of bipolar wellness. One of my highest priorities during a crash is to stabilize my sleep. Whether that means using sleep aids, sticking to a strict bedtime, or cutting out screen time before bed, I'll do whatever I can to restore a healthy sleep cycle. Sometimes just one night of solid sleep can be a big turning point in recovering from an episode. Tip number 7, take advantage of the warrior's training grounds. Learning coping skills is like learning how to swim from a book. We can understand the basic concepts, but until we get in the water and feel the resistance, it's hard to turn that knowledge into wisdom. When we're crashing, we actually have a pool to swim in. We can practice all of the coping skills we learned and figure out what works and what doesn't. Take advantage of being in the pool instead of drowning in it. This gives our suffering purpose and reduces the pain. My last tip today is to know when it's time to throw in the towel and seek help. Sometimes a crash isn't something I can just wait out. If I'm stuck in a depressive episode for too long, or if I start having thoughts of self-harm, I reach out for professional support. I know from experience how fast things can go from bad to catastrophically worse, sometimes overnight. There's no shame in needing extra help. In fact, the strength it takes to seek help when we're at our worst is extremely admirable. We've covered a lot of ground today on Polar Warriors. Please let me know in the comments if you found this video to be helpful. Your feedback means the world to me, and by commenting or liking the video, you increase the chances that YouTube will show this video to a wider audience. Thanks in advance for helping me help more people. Take extra good care of yourselves, and I'll be back here soon with more Polar Warrior videos. Stay well.